Princess Elira had spent her whole life being told that humans belonged in the same place as sea dragons, star spirits, and the impossible machines said to sleep beneath dead moons. In songs, in nursery warnings, in dusty archives, no sensible person opened twice. So when the fire came screaming out of the night and tore a burning wound across the sky above the palace, her first thought was not that danger had arrived, but that one of her old myths had finally decided to fall out of the heavens and land in her garden. The royal grounds shook, silver trees bent under the shockwave, and a trail of black smoke cut across the moonlit flowers she had planted with her own hands. Then the thing crashed through the crystal fountain and buried itself in the white earth, hissing, burning, alive. And as Elira stood frozen in her night robes, with the scent of smoke and crushed petals filling her lungs, she heard something move inside the broken metal shell. Something slow, wounded, unmistakably living. And in that single breath before the guards arrive, the Princess of Elindra realized that stories became dangerous the moment they started bleeding. The hatch burst outward with a violent clang, and the creature that dragged itself from the wreckage looked nothing like the monsters painted in ancient temple walls. There were no fangs, no glowing claws, no crown of divine fire, only a man, broad-shouldered, bleeding from the brow. One arm hanging useless at his side, his dark flight suit scorched almost black, his chest rising with painful effort, as if even breathing had become a battle he refused to lose. He saw her through the steam and broken vines, and for one impossible second, his eyes sharpened with the alertness of a hunted animal. Not a myth, not a god, not a beast, a man, human, real. Elira should have screamed for the guard, should have run, should have remembered every lesson drilled into royal daughters about unknown threats and contamination and deception. But instead, she stepped forward, because the oldest part of her had waited years for wonder and would not be denied now. The man tried to stand straighter, failed, then gave a crooked half-smile that looked as though it had survived several wars just to reach her. And in a voice rough with smoke, he said, "Please tell me I did not just crash into something important." That was the moment the myth looked at her and asked for help. By the time the palace sentries reached the moon garden, Elira had already hidden him. She did it with the kind of reckless speed that only the sheltered ever truly master. With no training in treason and all the confidence of a girl who had been underestimated since birth, she led him through the collapsed arbor, down the marble stair beneath the fountain basin, into an old astronomer's chamber sealed generations ago and remembered. Now only because she read forbidden books when court tutors thought she was sleeping, the human, who said his name was Jonah Vale, moved with staggering discipline, never complaining, never once asking why she was helping him, though his blood marked every third step and his face had gone pale beneath the soot. Above them, the palace alarms began to sing. Not the clear chimes of accident or fire, but the low red cadence of pursuit. And then came the message over the palace lattice. An unidentified hostile craft has breached the inner perimeter. Royal units are to search all sectors. Eliminate surviving threats on sight. Jonah went very still at those words, then looked at Elira with a focus that made her feel, for the first time in her privileged life, like someone standing near the heart of a storm. He reached into his suit, pulled free a small fractured data core, and pressed it into her hand. "Keep this away from your High Council," he said. "If they get it, your world dies quietly. If the ones chasing me get it, your world dies screaming." The princess who loved bedtime myths had just inherited a war. Elira should have given him up then, should have called her mother, the Empress, should have trusted the glittering ministers who always spoke of order and peace and stability. But peace had a rotten smell in Elindra lately. It lived in corridors where servants stopped talking when nobles passed, It hid in closed council sessions. It stared out from the new warships hanging above the capital, though no war had been declared. And when Elira demanded answers, Jonah gave them without ornament. Humanity was real, scattered, hunted, driven to the edges of charted space after refusing to surrender old navigation. Gates built long before either species claimed the stars. The Elindran High Council had secretly allied with the Varkesh Dominion, a regime so efficient at conquest that whole civilizations disappeared under treaties before anyone called it invasion. The data core contained transit maps to every hidden human refuge and every unguarded approach to the Elindran Heartworld. Sold by traders within her own court, Elira listened with cold hands and a colder spine. Because every word fit too neatly into the shape of her growing dread, then the chamber doors above burst open. Voices echoed down the stairwell, and Jonah, half dead though he was, rose between her and the entrance with nothing but a ruined sidearm and a look that seemed carved out of iron. "Do not come closer," he whispered. "If they find you helping me, they will bury you in ceremony and call it honor." Then the hunted man chose to stand. So the princess chose to stop being sheltered. The first soldier through the stairwell never fired. Jonah moved before Elira even saw him decide. He slammed the broken sidearm into the soldier's visor, caught the falling pulse rifle with his good hand, and turned the narrow stone corridor into a place too small for fear and too loud for dignity. He fought like someone who understood pain as background noise, like someone who had learned a long time ago that survival was not grace. It was stubbornness weaponized. 2 guards fell. A third shouted for reinforcements, and Elira, shaking and furious and suddenly finished with being ornamental, grabbed the astronomer's prism staff from the wall mount and drove it into the alarm conduit. The chamber exploded into darkness. Jonah glanced back at her with a flash of savage approval. "Nice timing, princess." Together they fled upward through servant shafts and moon bridges, through kitchens, aviaries, in glass galleries where the city lights below shimmered like trapped constellations. Behind them the palace turned on itself. Loyal guards clashed with council units. Orders contradicted orders. And the beautiful machine of empire began to choke on the lie at its center. When they reached the western tower, Elira transmitted the data core not to the council, but to every public beacon on the planet. Every dock, every school, every military channel, every worker district the nobles pretended not to see. Truth flooded the world in one burst of forbidden light. And all at once the silence that had protected treachery for years was shattered by ordinary people who finally knew what had been sold in their name. This was not the night a princess was rescued by a myth. This was the night an empire learned what happens when humans survive. And when good people stopped kneeling, dawn found the moon garden ruined and radiant. Petals blackened, fountains shattered, silver branches scattered like fallen spears. Elira stood beside Jonah as emergency ships descended through the thinning smoke, not council ships, but the first human vessels to enter Elindran's sky in 3 centuries, lean, scarred, practical ships that looked built by hands which valued function above grandeur and endurance above pride. Jonah swayed on his feet, exhausted, stitched together by grit and whatever stubborn fire kept his species moving long after wiser creatures would have surrendered. The lead vessel opened a channel. A woman's voice, warm and disbelieving, came through the garden air veil. "You impossible idiot." Jonah laughed once, soft and tired, and Elira understood at last why humans had become myth, not because they were gods, but because people turn the unbearable into legend when they cannot believe anyone truly lived through it. She looked at the man who had fallen from the stars into her flowers and changed the fate of her world before sunrise. And she smiled as the first light spilled over the broken palace. "When I was little," she said, "they told me humans were only stories." Jonah looked at the arriving ships. then at the city waking beneath them, and answered in that same war-worn voice, "Princess, the best stories are always written by the ones who refuse to die."